Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Petralia, Associate Director of Development and Data Analytics for the Japan-America Society of Greater Philadelphia. Welcome and thank you for joining us for a tour of Shofuso and Modernism, mid-century collaboration between Japan and Philadelphia, and a talk with the curators Yuka Yokoyama and William Whitaker. I want to thank the exhibition's funder, the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage, for making this exhibition and program possible. Yuka is the Associate Director of Exhibitions and Programs at JSGP and is a Curator and Project Manager for Japan Philly 2020. Since 2009, Yuka has served as co-director to Marginal Utility Gallery in Philadelphia's Callow Hill neighborhood with her spouse, David Dempy-Wolf. She has curated exhibitions and created opportunities to engage and work on projects with the ICA Philadelphia, Arcadia University, Recycled Artists in Residence, Icebox at Crane Arts, Asian Arts Initiative, New Art Dealers Alliance, Residency Unlimited, and the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage, representing artists from diverse backgrounds. Bill is the guest architectural curator for Shofuso and Modernism, and the Curator and Collections Manager of the Architectural Archives of the University of Pennsylvania School of Design. Trained as an architect and architectural historian at the University of New Mexico and the University of Pennsylvania, Bill primarily works on documenting and interpreting Penn's design collections, including holdings related to the life and work of architect Louis Kahn and landscape architect Lawrence Halprin, as well as that of the husband and wife design team of Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. Tonight, Yuka will offer a brief introduction of the exhibition, and Bill will present the tour. We'll take questions in the chat during the tour and offer some time at the end for more discussion. You can raise your hand or just chat to all panelists and we'll be able to read your questions for you. Now, please welcome Yuka to the main screen.
Hello, my name is Yuka Yokoyama. I'm the curator of the Shofuso and Modernism exhibition and associate director of exhibition and programs at the Japan-America Society. Before Bill Whitaker takes you to the tour of the exhibition, I would like to introduce behind the scenes and the making of Shofuso and Modernism exhibition. This exhibition tells the story of the interpersonal relationships between Junjo Yoshimura, George Nakashima, Antonin, and Noemi Raymond, whose work is based on a mindful understanding of land and nature and a deep respect for the architecture and the craft tradition of Japan. Inspiration for this exhibition, these are from my bookshelf. These are Junjo Yoshimura's exhibition catalog gifted by Felicia Fisher to Shofuso many years ago, and exhibition catalog of Takasaki Museum borrowed from Mira Nakashima, and Japan Architecture exhibition catalog from Mori Museum that Ken Tadashi Oshima contributed. Craft and Modern World, Architecture and Design of Antonin and Noemi Raymond exhibition catalog, created by William Whitaker. Japan-America Society's executive director, Kim Andrews, and I traveled to Japan in late June 2019. We had the opportunity to stay at the International House in Roppongi, because this building was constructed under the collaboration of three prominent Japanese architects, Kunio Maekawa, Junjo Sakakura, and Junjo Yoshimura in 1955. We also visited the Shofuso's sister garden, Sorakuen in Kobe, and met with the gardeners who renovated Shofuso's tea garden in 2018. Here's Kim looking at the garden in the rain. And then we traveled from Kobe to Kyoto to meet Dr. Kato. Dr. Kato is an important inspiration and a partner for Shofuso. Dr. Kato, 8th generation of traditionally trained Japanese gardener who runs Murin-an, in Kyoto. It's a Japanese garden in Kyoto built between 1894 and 1898. It is an example of classical Japanese garden of Meiji period. So at this time, with this trip, we asked Dr. Kato to visit Shofuso for some consultation. We went to Karuizawa from Kyoto to visit Wakita Museum. This is another Yoshimura architecture. Wakita House and Studio was designed by Junzo Yoshimura in 1970. Wakita, a painter, was Yoshimura's friend from Geidai, Tokyo University of the Arts. This is a picture of Kim with Kimi Wakita, curator of Wakita Museum. She's sort of a liaison between Japanese side and the Philadelphia side for this exhibition. And this is, we also visited St. Paul Catholic Church in Karuizawa that was built in 1935, designed by Raymond's architectural firm in Tokyo. To the left, this is not original, but Naomi designed the paper glass for this building, and also the chair that you see on the left-hand side is a collaboration between Noemi and Georgie Nakashima. And the picture on the left is Kim Andrews from Philadelphia cannot help taking picture of the bells. So, next picture, we came back from Japan to Philadelphia, and we visited Raymond Firm's architectural talk summer 2019, while we were waiting to hear from the Pew Foundation. After Pew Foundation grants announcement, we were back in Wakita Museum in early November 2019. Kim Andrews and I were invited to speak at the Mid-Century Architecture Symposium with Ken Tadashi Oshima, Mira Nakashima, Charlotte Raymond, and Juliet Kitchen from MoMA. Now, this is the pre-lecture lunchtime, and then group picture time. And then this is the presentation of each participant. And then this is a picture from the after party where museum volunteers served hot soup for the audience. July 2020, we visited Rockefeller Brothers Fund in upstate New York. The tea house was commissioned by the Nelson Rockefeller family to Junzo Yoshimura in 1964, and David Eagle designed the garden. David Eagle also helped Tansai Sano and Junzo Yoshimura when Shofuso Garden was installed in 1957 in West Fairmount Park. So we were connecting the dots and reuniting with the many partners surrounded with Shofuso. And February 2020, Dr. Kato visits Shofuso and educates us about Shofuso's core value based on his historic research and experience. Concept of utsushi is one of the unique value of Shofuso, as Shofuso being modeled after Kojo-in near Kyoto. According to Dr. Kato, the Philadelphia site with forested background and 5 times more space than the MoMA courtyard, Sano, the Shofuso, the original gardener, made a plan for making Shofuso a true utsushi of Kojo-in. This Japanese concept of utsushi was central to their work. It is similar to the classical music concept of variation of a theme. It is perhaps best translated as homage to spirited inspiration. Utsushi do not simply copy the form of the inspiration, but rather are built in built in creative communication with them, subtly expanding on foundation and creating an interrelated family of masterpieces. Excuse me. Documentary film production starts with Nadia Horinaka, Matt Sub, Aaron Eager from Greenhouse Media, local film production company, and a documentary film. This is a scene from producing a documentary film, and this documentary film will premiere on October 9th with the talk event with Nadia Hironaka and Matt Sub. Ken Tadashi Oshima comes to Shofuso for filming and a meeting for Shofuso and Modernism. Ken's perspective on transnational architecture and design is crucial to this exhibition, and he will be presenting Founding in Translation lecture on September 17th. And these are a picture of us visiting New Hope with Ken, and then the red sweater is Mira Nakashima, Janet Raymond, Antonin and Noemi's granddaughter, and Bill Whitaker, John Yano, Mira's husband, and Ken Tadashi Oshima together having conversations. And then March 2020 comes, and plan was sort of hold off for a couple months. And then we have to reconfigure the exhibition. And then late May, we resumed the production of the exhibition. And the production team, Greenhouse Media, is back in New Hope. Originally, a bus tour to Raymond Farm and the Nakashima studio from Shofuso were planned. But instead, after the pandemic, we commissioned Elizabeth Ficilla to take portraits of 3 locations. To prepare for this project, Ficilla studied historic and archival photographs of the 3 locations to determine how to properly capture the atmosphere and the light of the spaces. So that's Elizabeth on the black outfit to the front with Charlotte Raymond, and I cannot see this, but, and sorry. And these are some installation test that's what set it up in the Nakashima studios, and then to the left, Elizabeth shooting Raymond house. Meanwhile, at the Shofuso, the collaboration with the Ikebana School in Philadelphia for the photo shoot was setting up. Mallory's car of Soget School creating utsushi of an arrangement that was displayed at the MoMA exhibition in 1954. So the gray photograph is a reference to what the flower arrangement was like in 1954, and the color photograph is the Mallory's arrangement. So this is another example of utsushi. And the Greenhouse Media was back in Shofuso to resume interviews for the documentary film. And the photo shoot with Elizabeth Ficilla, to the left, the photographs on the left-hand side, Elizabeth is talking to our Shofuso gardener, Sandy Polyakov, about how Japanese gardens were photographed with emphasis on light and the contrast, referring to the book In Phrase of Shadows by Junichiro Tanizaki. And the photograph to the right is taken at 5 a.m. at the Shofuso. Installation of the exhibition really started a couple weeks ago here at the Shofuso, and Bill Whitaker's wife, Shopa, brought the curry-flavored pea couscous with herb and lime sauce for vegan gardeners. This is where we are eating, socially distanced. And this is a picture of Bill and staff member James working on this installation piece. This exhibition was made possible by the support of the grant from the Pew Center Arts and Heritage that was awarded in November 2019. Shofuso and Modernism was primarily developed during the pandemic. The production of this project was not always straightforward, and we had to stop and rethink our plans many times throughout the process. I deeply appreciate Mira Nakashima and Charlotte Raymond's collaboration on this project during this very difficult time. They're the living witnesses of this transcultural exchange and are keeping this friendship and a legacy intact for the future generations. William Whitaker is the guest curator of this project, and he's tirelessly provided thoughtful guidance, kindness, and gave his full support to this exhibition throughout the process. Bill has not only brought extensive knowledge to this project, but more importantly, he pulled the entire team together with care and respect, similar to the spirit of how Yoshimura, Nakashima, and the Raymonds work together. Through making this exhibition together, Bill became mentor to me as well as Shofuso staff. This picture is from our Visitor Service Associate training session led by Bill Whitaker. And the more information about upcoming events, please visit shofusoandmodernism.com. This website is made especially for this exhibition. And upcoming talk event, Ken Tadashi Oshima Found in Translation is in September 17th in conversation with Mira Nakashima, Charlotte Raymond, and Bill Whitaker. And the registration now open. And the Raymond Farm is open every Saturday from September 26th to November 14th. So if you have time, please register and enjoy the Raymond Farm in New York as well as Shofuso in Philadelphia. Now, Bill is going to take you all to a tour of the Shofuso and Modernism exhibition. Thank you.
I'm not seeing it yet. You should be live. Can I see?
We're just seeing if we actually have the connection.
Oh yeah, you're good.
We're good?
Mhm.
Yeah. We're almost there. I'm just going to so I can see what I'm seeing. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Bill Whitaker. I'm the guest curator of Shofuso and Modernism. It's been an extraordinary journey and a wonderful opportunity to really explore this wonderful place that we have in Philadelphia that is Shofuso House and Garden. My wife and I live not far from here. This has always been a place that we come for some peace and quiet, you know, this wonderful, joyful place which combines architecture and landscape so beautifully and so meaningfully. And so to be here for the installation, to be here to see people coming together to enjoy this place in the past several weeks has been really wonderful. a wonderful kind of opening up after all these days of being cooped up in our houses and so on. So it's been wonderful to see that. It's also wonderful to pick up on a project that one does years ago that brings you into contact with friends and colleagues and the kind of people that you share an experience with, and that experience carries with you for many years, including friendships. And I'm thinking about my colleagues from Crafting a Modern World, an exhibition project also funded by the Pew many years ago, that allowed us to really dig deeply into the life and work of Antonin and Noemi Raymond, two of the figures that we explore in Shofuso and Modernism. And I'm thinking of my colleagues, Kurt Helfrich, Mari Nakahara, Christine Vondradi Ozano, Kendadashi Oshima, and also Paul Prince, who was our special exhibition designer, who sadly passed away this year. It's wonderful to carry memories of those times with me into this project, and also the great learning that I got from collaborating with those my colleagues. I also have to say something about Kim Andrews. I'm a great fan of Kim Andrews, and she's the executive director of Shofuso. And when she and Yuka Yokoyama came to ask me to somehow be a part of this exhibition, it's something I could not say no to. It's, you know, they're very persuasive people, but it's also where you make connections to people and places over longer periods of time. And you realize that you really have a commitment that's important to helping others understand these places that are of value to us, not just as scholars or as curators, but actually meaningfully convey human experience in art. And Shofuso is such a place, as well as the Raymond Farm and the Nakashima Studios, which were the three sites that we really got to explore. But I would certainly be remiss without, you know, mentioning the friendship and support of the Raymond family, particularly through Charlotte Raymond, Janet Raymond, and Doris Mills, who tirelessly, you know, supported us as we brought groups, the photography, the filmmakers, and so on up to Raymond Farm. But also Mira Nakashima and the staff up at Nakashima Studios. We could not have asked for better collaborators with this. It's, maybe not an exaggeration to see, to say that it feels like there's a family feel out of this project, and it has a lot to do with their gracious hospitality. So we're very grateful to them for that. But the project really, it's to take time with places, and to, under this extraordinary circumstance of COVID lockdowns, to have had the luxury as someone who is in charge of a major archive, but to have 25, 26 days to spend on site, really looking at these places closely. That's an extraordinary gift. And each time you come to these places, they give you something. You learn something new. And for me, and I think many of you out there, you know that those are places that are treasures, because they're giving you something, but they're also asking something of you. They bring you back. These are places and their impact that cause you to come back to them, and we ought to. And so I thought in part of the pitch that Kim Andrews made to me, to my colleague Ken, and to others who are a part of this project, is really, we have to see Shofuso as a connector between this larger legacy. Not just Japan and the United States, but there's a circle of artists that work closely together, and that's Antonin and Noemi Raymond, that's Junzo Yoshimura and George Nakashima. They had this incredible shared experience of working together in Japan in the late 20s and 1930s. But also they were able to bring that experience of Japan collectively, but also in their individual work here in the United States. And it's a very special legacy that in the Philadelphia region, we have these incredible examples of the Nakashima Studios, the Raymond Farm, and Shofuso. So for Kim, it was really introducing a level of newer interpretation of Shofuso. Generally, when people come here, they see and experience a great example of classical Japanese architecture, something that you might have seen were you to suddenly appear in 17th century Japan. And visited a temple complex and entered into a wonderful guest house called Kojo-in. And some curators at the Museum of Modern Art in the early 1950s, at the suggestion of Antonin Raymond, Izumo Noguchi, and others, visited Kojo in, along with Junzo Yoshimura. I'm talking about Arthur Drexler in particular. And they thought it was a great idea to bring this example of Japanese classical architecture to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And while that might seem quite strange, it's actually a way that MoMA as an institution was asking questions about what modernism was all about and what we draw on as inspiration in modernism. Is it more than, you know, a reverence for the machine? Is it more than, you know, embracing modern materials? And of course it is. And there were many architects globally, but particularly in places like Japan, that understood that and saw before them this incredible craft tradition that was living. It was living all over the place. And not just the craft tradition, but in the rural locations, even in some of the cities, people were living in a way that they had for centuries. And the architecture and how it combined and served society at many different levels was a great inspiration to these architects. And it's something that the Raymonds, when they arrived, initially as collaborators working for Frank Lloyd Wright on the Great Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, it was an incredible awakening, an incredible place to be. You know, the Raymonds established themselves after a year of working with Frank Lloyd Wright. They had actually worked in Wisconsin on Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin, so they had the experience of living in a rural location and working there at the same time. We're making a little adjustment to the phone here that needs a charge. So we're just rolling with things right now. And I've got my cell phone here, not to check time, but just to see what you guys are seeing from time to time. And so, you know, after that experience of working with Frank Lloyd Wright, but seeing this incredible world around them, a country that had this great tradition, these great traditions all around them, but also this enthusiastic engagement with the modern world. They recognized they had a place there and that they could make a go of it themselves. So in 1921, they established an independent office from Frank Lloyd Wright, and they stayed. The first years were challenges, although they were working extensively for some of the foreigners in Japan. They also had Japanese clients. But it was really the great natural disaster of the Kanto earthquake in September 1923 that really, you know, sealed it for the Raymonds, that they committed to staying in Japan. They recognized they had a place in rebuilding a country after a great natural disaster. There was the earthquake followed by the Great Fire that consumed much of Tokyo. And modern architects with that modern material of reinforced concrete that's both fireproof and earthquake proof, that became a material that gained extraordinary, you know, had an extraordinary potential in the future of Japanese architecture. And the Raymonds certainly were able to enter into that in a really important and meaningful way. First, in a house they designed for themselves, called the Renanzaka House, right next to the American ambassador's residence that Raymond was designing in collaboration with an American architect at that time. But this is not your ordinary concrete. This is concrete that is cast with an understanding of the wood traditions in Japanese architecture. So you can imagine the surface of concrete, which takes whatever the mold is, the impression of that mold, could never be more beautifully rendered than in Japan. And they went so far as to polish the concrete surface out of a pride for the sense of materiality. And that dialogue between the wood traditions of Japanese architecture and concrete as a material became a really important touchstone for Japanese modernism. Raymond was an important figure in it, in that. There were certainly others, but Raymond is a central figure in the flowering of Japanese modernism, and one is distinctive for being European in his training, European in his origins, American in citizenship, but someone who is in their history books as a figure that brought important ideas. He also created a place of training for an important generation of Japanese architects, including Junzo Yoshimura and George Nakashima. But before moving on to them, I have to obviously say something about Noemi Raymond, who, as a woman designer, someone who has, designed houses, maybe not as a fully trained architect cognizant of all the issues of structure and so on, but somebody who could shape space through materiality, through the design of furniture, through color, through lifestyle, through the sense of how you move through a space and how you occupy a space. And her insight was essential to Antonin's success, although following, in a sense, the convention of the time, she stood behind her husband. And even in the 1940s, when her work was exhibited and included at a defining exhibition for post-war furniture, although it wasn't post-war yet, it was called Organic Design and Home Furnishings, 1941 at the Museum of Modern Art. Her textiles, which won awards as part of that exhibition, were listed under Antonin's name. So she's a figure that really is in the middle of things in the practice. And she is also someone of European origin. She was born in Switzerland, in Geneva, but came to the United States as a young woman with her mother. She trained at Columbia Teachers College with the great art educator Arthur Wesley Dow, who himself had a very keen interest in Japanese art and was using that as a way to think of new ways of learning and teaching art. So you could not ask for a better education to prepare you to go to Japan. And then Antonin, too, in his education in the Czech Republic, this was a country that had folk art traditions, had great architecture, and in the 19-teens and around the turn of the century, their modernism was actively considering both what had come before alongside what the modern world has to offer. So they were able to bring that experience along with the experience they had working for Frank Lloyd Wright to Japan. So in the late 20s, they're getting more successful in their practice. They're doing embassies for what seems like every country, from Russia to Belgium to France to the United States, Canada, and so on. They're doing factories. They're doing the Tokyo Golf Club, the Tokyo Tennis Club. They're doing houses for European traders, but also for Japanese families, including families like the Akaboshi family that had one son that went to Princeton, one son that went to the University of Pennsylvania, and another son who I think was educated in Boston. I forget exactly where. And so, these are people who are flowing in a very, international world, but also understanding the traditions that have come before. It's at that time in the late 20s that Junzo Yoshimura steps into the Raymond offices the first time, first as a student and full-time by 1930-31. And he is a native-born Japanese, born and raised in Tokyo, classically educated, and very deep in his understanding of language, of cultural traditions, and immediately becomes this central figure in the Raymond's lives and work. Someone who offered a sense of translation, right? Who was keen on engaging with the international context and with the Raymonds. And, between 1928, when he first started to work with the Raymonds, and 1941, when he left the Raymond farm, and I'll get to those details in a moment, he was very much a part of their life and work. In 1934, George Nakashima shows up in the Raymond office. And actually one of the treasures we have in the collection at the University of Pennsylvania in the Architectural Archives, amongst our many holdings related to Antonin and Noemi Raymond, George Nakashima, and so on, is George Nakashima's letter of introduction and his resume proposing that the Raymonds employ him, which of course they did. But he was Japanese American, so he's a first generation Japanese American born in Spokane, Washington. His family lived for much of their lives up until that point in the Seattle area. So he was trained at the University of Washington, trained at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and then trained in Paris at the Fontainebleau School before winding up in Japan. And in America, it's the Depression, so there's not a lot of work in America at that time. So Nakashima was fortunate to be able to travel internationally and to be able to engage through work with the traditions of Japan. So it became a very magical and important time. He was also distinctive in that office. It's generally people who were native-born Japanese, architects, that circle of about 15 to 18 people who worked in the Raymond office, besides the Raymonds, he stood apart for his experience, for his origins. He had family in Japan, but this was a wonderful way for him to engage and work in that context. And so they were able to take that experience of the 1930s, and I'm going to start to show you some objects in a moment, but just to give you the larger context before moving on. You know, that period in the 1930s is really this flowering where the Raymonds are doing work that, you know, involves the combination of these traditions in terms of craft with modernity, with modern materials like concrete. They're involving themselves in the lifestyle. The Japanese are both having to contend with a life centered on the floor using tatami mats, which is generally interiors that don't have furniture, or not what we would conventionally call furniture, with interiors that had furniture, chairs, you know, andirons, fire dogs, tables, and so on. And often these spaces occupied the same space within a building, and that became important and an important part of their building. They took that experience in the late 30s to the United States and settled themselves in New Hope, Pennsylvania, where they acquired a 18th century old Quaker farmhouse. And they basically honed out of that interior this early American vernacular architecture, which they found great inspiration in, just as they had in the farmhouses of rural Japan, which were infinitely variable to local conditions, material, and lifestyle, but yet had this, you know, systematization that came out of building systems, including tatami mats, other conventions that, you know, created a common ground between those examples. And first, Yoshimura experienced that space. He worked at the Raymond farm for a year before leaving in July of 1941 to go back to Japan. America's had put embargoes on the Japanese country at that point in time. And so that was, Junzo had to leave, and he probably got one of the last boats out from San Francisco in July 31st, 1941. In the meantime, George, via a stay in India, where he did an important project with the Raymonds for a Hindu ashram, and that's really where he begins to make furniture for the first time, really out of a spiritual devotion. And he brings that engagement with materiality and craft and the direct engagement with it in furniture making from India, although he had seen it in the context of the Raymond office and how it was designed under Antonin and Noemi, but also how it was made under the Japanese craftsmen. So that experience carries into his work in India, and then of course to Seattle. But you know, being a Japanese American on the West Coast after Pearl Harbor meant he and his family were led to one of the detention centers in Idaho for Japanese Americans. And in that location, he had his first experience working with a traditionally trained Japanese carpenter. And it would have a profound impact, but also I think just being in that situation, that dehumanizing situation with his family and so many others there must have had a profound impact. But the Raymonds and other colleagues were able to help get the Nakashimas out of internment camp, out of the detention center. It's part of being in Pennsylvania and having so many Quakers centered in Philadelphia, you know, and having them be here. They were one of the religious groups that saw and supported the Japanese American people, and that this was injustice. So the Nakashimas were able to come here in 1943, in the winter of 43, and stayed in the Raymond farm for about a year. And in that time, Nakashima was able to establish himself as a furniture maker. He started to get orders from Knoll, which was an important furniture company. It still is, based in this region. And you know, really get a successful start as a furniture maker. But he was an architect first, and he learned about furniture design in the Raymond office, you know, under the mentorship of Antonin and Noemi, in the friendship with Junzo Yoshimura. So this is an important circle of people who have that shared experience. And so I want to show you some specific objects here. And then, so why don't we're going to move a little bit, and we're going to try to make this work. So what time is it? So I got 15 minutes. Okay. So I'm going to start here, and we're installing an exhibition in an exhibition. Shofuso was built as an exhibition space. It's not a space that was really lived in. So recognizing that to bring furniture and furnishings into this space is not something that was ever anticipated by the curators who commissioned this of the Museum of Modern Art. And yet I think it's very special to have this furniture here from that point of view of the Raymonds in their work in the 30s, what Yoshimura and Nakashima experienced. You had to negotiate how these two worlds are coming together. So that's really this idea of living in two worlds. And so some of the furniture that I'm showing here includes a chair that Noemi Raymond designed for the Tetsuma Akaboshi House in Tokyo from 1934. Beautiful wood, a grass rattan for the covering. That's combined with a rug that she designed in the same period that is a wonderful abstraction of a lotus field, right? So you can see this is an interpretation of the Japanese landscape. We see a wonderful light that she designed. It's an object that actually dates from the 1950s. And it was probably a lamp that they kept near one of their desks in the office that they created after World War II in Tokyo. This wonderful handmade mulberry paper from Japan. Beautiful detail of this object. And we've actually crossed over into the display area of the exhibition. So we're taking you behind the scenes of this exhibition, right? Behind me is a series of furniture by George Nakashima. And, I wanted to focus on a series of pieces that were from this period in which George was working out at the Raymond Farm, including a table called the Milk House Table, and some other objects that meaningfully connected with his experience of living in the internment camp, the detention center in Idaho, and then bringing that experience here to New Hope. And also some of the early pieces, his early chair pieces, which picked up on American traditions like the Shaker traditions. But also I think had to bring forth some respect from the craft traditions he had seen in Japan, along with the spiritual dimensions of the time at the Hindu monastery. But behind me is another, one of Noemi Raymond's beautiful fabric designs, and she did many. This is one called Strip Fields. This is a piece that was part of the organic design in home furnishings, so she designed this in the early 1940s, maybe 1940, 41. It appeared in one of their early houses, the Briggs Carrera house, on Montauk Point in 1942, but it was produced in mass in the late 40s by a company called Schumacher's. But is this a portrait, perhaps, of New Hope? Is this the idea of the strip fields of that rural landscape of New Hope? And just beautifully rendered here in a fall color scheme, perhaps? There were other colorways, as fabric curators would call it, and fabric designers, and there's a different version with a bluish leaf. So there's different ways that you can interpret and understand the landscape and the sense of abstraction of it, right? So maybe if James steps back a little bit and we can look at the Milk House Table, and we got to position ourselves. Just bear with us for a second. And so we have this wonderful table here, which is a low table. And this is a prototype of a table that was built originally at the Raymond Farm. It's called the Milk House Table because there's a little structure at the Raymond Farm called the Milk House. And this is the space that George was able to use in his furniture making. So he turned it into his first shop in New Hope. There's photographs of the Nakashima family living in the Raymond Farm, and it includes the second version of the Milk House Table in that photograph. This one is possibly slightly earlier. And it represents a translation of that experience of Japan. Obviously this is a lower table and I'm sitting at it as you would sit at a table like this in a Japanese home. And in fact, some of the early photographs that you see of the Nakashima family living at the farm or at their first home, their first house on Akaton Road in New Hope, you see this table or a version of it where the family is kneeling, gathering, sitting on the floor around it. It's just the right height for that. The piece of wood in the center here is catalpa, which is an American wood, and it's actually a single piece, right? So it's got this extraordinarily wide piece of wood, and you can see it's actually cracked here as a single piece of wood, right? So he's learning the craft of woodworking, and this is an experimental piece, which I think is quite wonderful. On this table, I think, is also one of the objects that, when we proposed this exhibition initially, we knew it needed to be a central figure in this exhibition. And it gets at just the incredible story that is embedded within each tree, within each piece of wood. And that story includes just the seasons and droughts and all of these things that happen continuously in nature and affect growing things in very materially direct ways. And learning to see and appreciate those qualities in wood becomes a very important thing. And this piece of wood, it's from Idaho. It's called bitterbrush. It's a very slow growing desert, high desert tree. It doesn't grow very tall, but in its slow growth, it takes on this almost tortured form, but it's incredibly beautiful in its shape, in its character. And if you look at the photographs that were taken by the American government of the Japanese internees, the Japanese prisoners in the prison camps, a lot of Japanese were collecting this wood. It connected with them and their connection with nature. So it's something they brought into that difficult experience. They were finding beauty in the world around them. And so this is a piece, one of several pieces that the Nakashimas brought with them back from Idaho. This one's been mounted possibly in Idaho and made as a piece to appreciate, right? And the bark has been taken off. One had to carefully rub the surface of it. Of course, it's oxidized at this point after 60, 70, 70 or more years. But a thing that fascinates me about this is Nakashima brought many other pieces, and he incorporated that into some of his early furniture, especially in cabinets, and it would become pulls for drawers and sliding a door cabinet. So it's where you find beauty in the world around you, despite the challenges that you face in the world around you, right? Along that line, we also have over here a toy chest. It may have been just a simple chest that was made to pack up the Nakashima's belongings when they came to New Hope. And we're doing a little dance here so James can get around and get himself into position, so bear with us. And I'm going to ask him to move the camera along the front of the piece. This is just a very simple piece that was made out of the surplus or leftover plywood and fur that was used to build the barracks where the Japanese Americans were interned, where they lived. And this is scrap. And so you can see the plywood is very simple. You can see Nakashima has chosen to use roofing nails. So James is getting closer to that, and we're a little bit in shadow there. You can see it here. Down bottom, if you can go all the way to the bottom, there's actually a wood screw there. He ran out of his preferred material. You're a little in shadow there. But up top here, there's just this beautiful little notch there, which is a leftover, sign that this is maybe a leftover piece of wood. It was cut for something else. And, it maybe is a sign of where this piece came from. Maybe there's some memory in here from George that he knows what that is and it's part of it. So, so we're gonna move on from the furniture. And so I'll let James reposition himself over here. Okay. And so another really important part of this exhibition was and especially in light of COVID, it was so important to bring the physical experience of being in Raymond Farm, being at the Nakashima Studios, and being here at Shofuso to be able to capture that. And so I was fortunate to have the opportunity and friendship of Elizabeth Filicella. She's really an incredible architectural photographer based in New York. She's done amazing work all over the world. And in the middle of COVID, she flew to Houston, Texas to photograph the recently restored Rothko Chapel in Houston. But she has experience working in artist spaces. She's photographed Donald Judd's studios in New York, but also in Marfa, Texas, the Noguchi Foundation, and so on. And I got to know her through the Architectural Archives. She had a commission to photograph works by Louis Kahn, and she wanted to see the archives first, which I thought was quite extraordinary. And she's become a good friend. And in the case of this project, I think a really important collaborator. So we asked Elizabeth to make a photographic portrait of these three sites and to think of them as a constellation of sites that come together. And in the process of doing the photography, we were going to understand what that meant. And so it was important to bring that here to Shofuso. And so quietly, you can hear in the background some clicks and hums. And so we have here, we've brought old-fashioned slide projectors with old-fashioned 35mm color slides. We've gone retro in a way, but not out of nostalgia. It's actually out of the associations that slides have with travel. And with being here and there. Many people, not just architects, when they traveled would take slides and bring them back to share that experience with friends and family here in the United States. Also, if you were an architecture student or an art student, slides tie with lessons in learning, right? Education. And so this felt like in this time of COVID, where we're all staring at little screens and digital images, to actually take digital photography and go through the effort of translating it back into analog and to make that be a physical presence in the space with the click and the hum and the whoosh of a slide projector would be important. Japanese gardens have soundscapes, so in a sense, we're adding very gently to this space with this. So why don't we step in? And the slideshow is about 6 minutes long. And we are going to let you look at some of the images. And we're here at the Nakashima Studios. Yeah, we're here at the Nakashima Studios. I had to get closer to the camera because we're using the mic here. And these are projected within the 10-mat room. You can see we've got 2 old-fashioned slide projectors. These are the kinds you would see in classrooms. They're big, durable. Hopefully they're going to work for the next 11 weeks. We can see a series of photographs paired together. So it was important for Elizabeth and I to be telling a story with this combination of images. And I'm just waiting for a second for us to get to the next sequence. So here we are. We're going to see the 3 sites in a row here. We're starting with Junzo looking like an ad man from Madison Avenue. But this wonderful panoramic view of Shofuso, this is about 5:30 in the morning. We really wanted to give you a sense of the light here. This early morning light where the garden is just an absolute gem and the world is waking up. We see it from a distance, the house in its landscape with the beautiful sky, the new Pebble Beach. A little later, this is about 7:30. The way you arrange the shoji has to do with the hospitality of the house. The shoin, the desk, this area of study and learning, that was an important part of Shofuso, and it's also its predecessor, Kojo-in. The tokunomo, stepping back a little bit, but always the view to the garden important in the consideration. Sandy, the gardener, out watering the garden. This is again, a demonstration of hospitality, and he's giving it to all of you by watering the stones. Looking back, the room that I'm standing in is the one in the distance, the 10-mat room from the 15-mat room. The tea garden, a space that you cannot visit right now during COVID. And of course, during the rain, we're expecting thunderstorms. I hope we get it, it'll cool the place off. This was during the recent tropical storm. And just that deluge and how beautiful this place. You can see a gray heron on the Turtle Island. We were lucky to capture him. So we're at the end of the carousel and starting anew. So now we'll visit Raymond Farm. We're combining some archival photography with Elizabeth's contemporary photography. The house has experienced in late May, along with a photograph from 1940. The Raymond family, Antonin in the foreground, Noemi on the couch, their grandchildren and son together. The living room. Upstairs. And these spaces where you see Fasuma panels, shoji screens, other elements that were actually fabricated in Japan and brought over, along with some of their early belongings. You see it combined with early American furniture, which was from Noemi's family. One of the really important discoveries that we brought back to light was Noemi had her office in the master bedroom, going so far as to have a drafting table there. So we brought this photograph of her into the slideshow as a memory of that discovery, or reassociation, really. The third floor, where the farmers stayed, where the drafting people stayed and gathered in the house. And actually the space on the left is the room where the Nakashimas stayed when they were living at Raymond Farm. May also have been the room where Junzo stayed. So we just have a few more slides here and then we'll wrap up. But I think it's important for you guys to see the whole thing, so it's a couple more minutes. The kitchen, that's such a center of the life at the farm. And this was a place where they raised cattle and they lived outside and they had great picnics outside. And so these are two photographs from the fall of 1940 before Junzo arrived. The barn, it had this incredible old Quaker barn that they modernized. And here it is in an archival photo, but also a modern picture. And then of course, the chickens of 2020 and the cattle of 1940. So our third site is the Nakashima Studios. This is a complex of 15 structures that Nakashima did for his family to live at, but also for the woodworking. And you can see the complex from the air in a period photograph, along with a chart with an electrical circuit board for lighting. But for us, this became less of a place to display incredible furniture design, but more of a place of work. So you can see Mira in the corner there. We see the workshops and the work areas of the staff. These are the finishing department and the wood shop. We see one of the woodworkers in the windows and another woodworker in the shop. This is an incredible place to work. Could you imagine this is where you were quarantining? You've got an incredible landscape around you and a beautiful window with fresh air that is part of the experience of making furniture. Here we see John Yarnell in the chair department, the beautiful window looking into the landscape in the chair department. The woods, an incredibly important aspect of Nakashima's work, alongside a lumber storage area. The cloister, part of the arts building. This is a spiritually inclined space. And instead of focusing on the church-like interior, we focus on the folk art objects, the connection between inside to outside that's so important in Japanese architecture and building. And then just to focus on the family's residence. This is the house that Nakashima began to build in 1947 for the family. Here showing Mira's room where she's creating a world, painting her world on her closet door. And then the addition that was for Kevin Nakashima, and then a collection of his objects that are part of that landscape inside the house, right? Living and working in their location. So now we're going to go outside and wrap up and take some questions. We'll talk together. Okay, so we are here to thank you for coming for the tour. I just broke my mask, so I've got to hold it. I'm going to take my glasses off too. But we were really excited that we were able to actually take you through the exhibition. tell you some of the story about it, and we're happy to take any questions that you have. Cara is ready to look at chat, and she'll read questions to us so that we'll be able to answer any questions that you have.
So far, we just have a couple
Seeing
folks
some of the chat.
saying thank you so much and that the slides were beautiful. If anybody has any questions.
Just bear with us for a second. We're getting there.
It's a little quiet. Well, maybe you could just read from the chat because it's a little quiet over here.
It's not from me.
Or maybe I could just read them. Yeah, I'm sorry, Kara, we're having a little trouble hearing you out here, so I'm just
Gotcha.
going to open
Okay.
up the chat.
Um,
Julie would like to know what is next for this team.
Do you still want to go for it?
Sure. No, I mean, this is where, for me, I recognized long ago when I first went to Raymond Farm and I got connected to the Raymond family and then to this larger legacy that involves the Nakashimas and Yoshimura, that I'm in for life. I'm not going to walk away from this legacy because I've learned so much from it. I value it so much. And I think it's so important to be able to help to bring them into a larger conversation about the heritage that we have in this area of the United States, in the Philadelphia region. It's also just really beautiful and incredibly important architecture.
Kim would like to know when is the exhibition installed until?
Till November 29th.
So this is a place that you're able to go from Wednesdays to Saturdays, and that the hours are there, and you're outside, so it's fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a very safe place to come, and we're hoping that everybody will show up, not all at once though.
Laura was wondering, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the garden was folded into the project.
Sure. I'll just say that the photography project, really one of the important aspects was understanding that connection between inside to outside, the connection of materiality. So this kind of threshold of inside and outside related to the exhibition and the installation design, everything faces the garden, right? So everything is oriented as an honored guest would be oriented. Now, when visitors are here, they're facing in. But before COVID, we had the idea that we were going to be able to allow visitors to sit in this space and to be able to look out and appreciate the view of the garden as it was intended. And that's not something that's been able to be done in recent years. So that's one aspect of it.
Yeah. And also when Dr. Kato visited Shofuso, he did historical research on the sites and also the research on the kojoin that Shofuso was modeled after. So what he taught us was not just how to maintain the garden and then keep the bushes low, but to actually find our core value, what Shofuso is about. And I think this exhibition really benefited from talking to Dr. Kato to recognize the harmonious coexistence of nature and architecture, which actually the concept of modern architecture that rooted into Shofuso design. So I think that the garden is part of the architecture, and the garden architecture as a part of the garden is something that we learned through this exhibition, and that sort of connecting architecture and the garden.
I'll just add one point quickly. One of the major things that Koto Sensei was talking about here, and he's this incredible 8th or 10th generation garden master, from Kyoto, who takes care of some of the major landscapes. He was teaching us, he was giving us a lecture using a green green laser pointer pointing at the landscape, and it was just absolutely amazing. But it's, that the house is a tool for viewing the garden, right? And that, the architecture really is so infused with an understanding of connecting to the world around it. And that's such a beautiful thing. And just also understanding that we could use the close understanding of the houses and how they connect to the world around them, not just through the material thresholds, but also through how they were created, who made them, and those experiences, the complex cultural relationships embodied in the Raymonds, Nakashimas, and Yoshimura, but also just the incredible times they lived in.
So just a couple more things. First off, Ellen says this is not a question, but I wanted to add that they were fortunate to actually live in a Yoshimura house in Kyoto from 1962 to 1973 as a young person, and that helped them to really appreciate Japanese and modern architectural elements, many of which you showed in pictures. So that's pretty lucky and pretty special. And then also, Destiny asks, will the Raymond Farm tours be through Zoom? Is there a possibility for a small in-person group?
Yeah, so one of the things we're really excited about is that the Raymond Farm is actually going to have some in-person tours. I think the website, the Raymond Farm Center for Living Arts and Design, I think the website is up now where you can register. So beginning at the end of this month, which I think is September 26th, and running until November 15th, they're going to have 2 tours on Saturdays, and they're not huge groups, so I would sign up soon. But it gives you an opportunity to visit that site in person, and it's a magical place. And we had the extraordinary opportunity because of COVID to really be able to work on that house and really, bring objects back into relationship that had lost some of their energy. And this is through no fault of the Raymond Farm at all. It's just that it's a visiting artist location. It's a very active place that does amazing programs. But they can't do that this year. So we could, make it and using historical photographs, bring it a little bit back into the focus in the way that the Raymonds had lived there in the 40s.
And thank you, Kara. Kara just posted a link to the Raymond Farm Center in the chat. So you can click on that if you'd like to make a reservation for one of those tours. And then Marilyn asked, will it be possible to visit Nakashima Studios?
Yeah, so the Nakashimas are not opening for tours this season. I think it's like the Architectural Archives at Penn. They're really there to make furniture, and they need to make sure that they're able to protect their staff. And in an effort to prioritize that, they've postponed all their tours and other events until such time as it is safe to re-engage. But that said, we've got an incredible group of photographs here. Also, in early October, we will be releasing the third part. A really major important part of our project is a documentary film, which Yuka mentioned, and there's some terrific footage of the Nakashima Studios there. So this is under the COVID time. This is a way that through the film we're able to bring a little bit more of that experience to your homes in these times. Anything else?
I think that's pretty much
It's your last chance.
Bill could talk about this all day.
Yeah. So go visit Raymond Farm on the Saturdays, and then come visit Shofuso whenever you can, and we'll be here. And if Bill or me are not here, the visitor service associates will take you to the very nice tour.
You couldn't ask for a more enthusiastic and knowledgeable group of guides as the staff that's here, and we really hoping, I think, in a way that this exhibition and the experiences that they're going to get associated with it really helps Shofuso engage with this larger context. And I think that's a really important thing to invest in. This project is making it possible. And we have to thank the Pew as this organization in the region that really invests in this kind of growth for institutions like Shofuso. So yay for you. And thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Good night.